Let's talk dinner guests and place settings. Maybe you've had guests over for dinner, and maybe depending on the prestige, shall we say, of those guests, or maybe just you wanted to honor them in a certain way, maybe even wanted to impress them, that may dictate to a degree what the place setting might look like. Before me and before you here are all place settings. They're all place settings. They have that in common. But there are also some radical differences between each one of the four. Hebrews chapter 7 is kind of giving the background of these place settings, so to speak. And then we'll zero in on one place setting in particular. So his first is just historically, this is the tribe of Levi. Aaron and Moses were of this tribe. They were the priestly class. They were those that were lifted up, firstborn sons that were entrusted to this position to be priests that would make the sacrifices and the offerings before God's people. This is how the story starts. It's humble beginnings. And yet, as time progresses, like many things, the heart and the intent and the will, this priestly class, was never meant to be for all time and forever. In fact, if you go to the time of Jesus, things progress in such a way that by the time he shows up and Jesus' ministry gets started, the priestly class is dominated by a group of people called the Sadducees, kind of this aristocrat group, mainly focused on power, money, wealth, and influence. They don't even believe in the Messiah. And yet they dominate what would be considered during the time of Jesus' life and ministry, this priestly class. So far have the people come from this era of how it all started to what it turned into. Hebrews chapter 7 paints a fascinating picture of this type of priest. He's not from the line and the lineage of Aaron and the Levitical group and family. He's something very different. It's this beautiful, mysterious picture of this priestly class that is set apart and different from any other. You could argue or could say in a way he's like a type of Christ, almost prefiguring Christ. In this way, he's a type of place setting, but he doesn't have the origins of the tribe of Levi. And yet there's something very, very special about him. We see that even Abraham gives up a tenth of what he has to this priest, and he's honored well. Hebrews chapter 7 points that when Jesus would show up, he would be more like this priest, this type of place setting, but Jesus would be the greatest of place settings. He would be, if you think of it as the ultimate fine china setup, the ultimate place setting, the most honored of guests, the greatest of priests, whose sacrifice would cover all sin for all time. So then what's the rub when Jesus shows up? He's the greatest. He's the best. Hebrews chapter 7 would say, in this way, he's sort of like Melchizedek, but he is the reality of the greatest and high priest. He had arrived. And in this way, he is the same, but he's also radically different from all others. And even in making this comparison, there's something unusual even still about Jesus. He would hold such prestige. He would have so much that had been written about his coming. He was quite literally the Messiah. And you can understand why the people who had passed on this lineage, who would later be known as the Sadducees, and in some cases, even the Pharisees within the Sanhedrin, why they would have such issue with this person who was not from their family lineage, who didn't share in what they saw as the prestigious bloodline. And yet Hebrews is saying That's because he's not from your bloodline. If your bloodline was good enough, you wouldn't need Jesus. Maybe you can relate to that. If your life was good enough, and if you could solve all your own problems and we could be holy and righteous all our own, we wouldn't need God to intervene, but we all do, and they did 2,000 years ago as well. What's fascinating, though, is Jesus as this dinner guest, though he leaves the glory, the splendor, and the perfection and the infinite riches of heaven to sit at this seat, Jesus shows up as a paper plate place setting. Jesus is both high priest and the highest level of prestige. And then at the exact same time, it would be as though you mixed in paper plates and plastic utensils with fine china. This is the fascinating part. He comes as somebody who understands the human condition. There's nothing about his appearance that we would see in Scripture that would be unusual or prestigious. He dresses like the common person. He eats amongst the common person. He's reviled by all of those who had cachet and pull and influence and wealth and power in society. They mock him on the cross, and yet this high priest, who is both a paper plate and plastic silverware place setting at the exact same time, is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, the absolute finest, the purest, and the best. And by suffering and dying on the cross, this perfect high priest makes himself both available to all of us just trying to get by with the paper plate type of life. And yet, because of Jesus, we now have available to us the glory, the honor, the riches, and the splendor of all eternity. Being counted, as Hebrews would say, Jesus as our brother, we enter into this royal family, even though this is all we deserve. But it's because he became this on the cross. He became the lowest, that now we get to receive the best because of his death and his resurrection. We too get to be a part of this family and share in this place setting.